If you want to go fast on track, then a proper suspension setup is critical. With this being a full race car, there's now a lot of things we don't need to consider, but also a lot of things we need to consider in much more detail. In this video, we're going to be showing you how to achieve that on this GT2RS Clubsport. We're out in Dubai this week for the UAE Time Attack series with our partner Mission Motorsport, based out here in Dubai. They set up a lot of the grid already, including this GT2RS Clubsport, so we've flown out to help them get much more of the grid set up in time for Sunday, getting all these cars ready to race and hopefully get some trophies. The GT2RS Clubsport is a purpose-built race car for track use only to sell to their customers, so this car is not road legal. This means that when we're developing the setup for this car, we don't have to consider a lot of things that we otherwise would. Normally, we need to consider things like weather changes and tyre choices. Whereas with this car, we know what the weather's going to be like. We're out here in Dubai. The weather is very consistent. And we also have the tyre of choice, the slick tyre that is being used on this car. So it can be very focused in terms of the setup. Also, we can really focus in on the owner of the car and their driving style. And we can have that conversation with them so we can make sure that our settings are fine-tuned to work perfectly for them in particular. The first step in setting the car up, we normally have to upgrade some components to increase the amount of adjustment available to us, such as on the GT3RS 992, we'd alter the camber block for one of ours, and on the GT4 chassis, we alter the top mount to increase the camber adjustment there too. However, with this being a full motorsport build from the factory, we have all the adjustability we need as standard on this car to get the settings we're looking for track. The GT2RS Clubsport is very different to the GT2RS road car, and there's quite a few standout features that we want to run you through that we thought were quite cool, so we just point them out. So the first one is looking at the car, the massive aero package with the huge element rear wing, which is massively adjustable in terms of positioning, and this car also comes with a 900-page document on setup configuration, including the aerodynamic positions, and it comes with different graphs such as how much downforce versus how much drag is induced, so we can fine-tune and choose out how much downforce we want to generate for the trade-off of how much drag we're going to generate. So we can look at the circuit like Dubai Autodrome, and we can evaluate the top speeds we're going to be hitting, look on the graph and see if it's worth the trade-off for the amount of drag we will receive, and we can fine-tune that aero based on that setting, which is a really, really neat feature. It also has very effective brake ducting. So if you look on the front through the bonnet, there's two nostrils that come in directly from the front, really clean, fast airflow. It comes in the huge nostrils through massive carbon ducting and into the back of the brakes directly through all the ducted assembly. So you've got a piece of pipe joining the carbon assemblies together for movement on lock, but otherwise the carbon bell on the back of the disc filters some air to the disc face and the rest cores into the bell housing itself, so you get cooling through the disc assembly, which is the most effective way to cool that disc, similar to how we've designed ours on the F80 M3, but this is obviously a lot larger with a lot more capacity of airflow as well. It also has three-way adjustable KW coilovers fitted, front and rear, so we can fine-tune the high-speed compression versus low speed and the rebound independently of one another to get the track performance of this car as optimum as possible for the different scenarios that we see on track, such as running curbs, loading through the corner. And it also comes with progressive rate bump stops, which again, we have the graphs supplied in the pack with the car, so we can see how much spring rate the actual bump stops generate. So if we were to activate the bump stop under full aero load, we know at which point in compression they would become too stiff to operate and which part we can operate on, which is a really cool feature as well. Up front, we've also got a very wide braking assembly with endurance pads in there, which are very, very thick compared to a standard car. So we've got a lot more time for the pad to wear away for endurance racing. It also comes with the 18-inch rims with the slicks fitted. So these rims are 18-inch, and we're going to do a video soon on wheel sizing and how you optimize your wheel size, because there's a lot of things to consider when getting an optimum wheel package together, because you've got your rotational inertia to consider of stopping and starting the wheel in rotation. You've got its packaging constraints, such as the brake packaging, how big are the brakes that we can get inside this barrel before we go too small, or if we go too big, how much weight will that carry as well. And then you've also got your tyre options. So there's quite a few factors around choosing the best wheel size for a car, but this one is on the 18s, like many race cars are, and many slicks are also manufactured in the 18-inch size as well, which definitely helps. Finally, up front, the last thing we'll point out, there are a lot of differences, but this is the last one we're just going to point out, is it's got blade adjustable anti-roll bars. So we're going to put the car in the air now and just talk a little bit more about those. So we're starting the setup with the anti-roll bars. So after our conversation with the customer, The main issue that is currently experienced with the car is mid-corner understeer. So this is something we're not unfamiliar with in the Porsche chassis, as it is quite a common trait. However, on the racing car, we know that we can get this adjustability perfect to get rid of that mid-corner understeer for him. So at the mid-corner section, one component has the largest effect over that understeer and oversteer characteristic at the apex, and that's your anti-roll bars. This is because your dampers at that point are almost ineffective because the car has finished transitioning its mass. It's in a steady state at the apex and it's ready to unload again for corner exit. So at that exact position on apex, theoretically, the anti-roll bars and coil springs are the only two factors fully determining the behaviour that we can tune on that car. There is also things like camber that can have an effect as well, but we know the camber was close before with the parameter data that we've seen, so we know that the main feature to adjust is going to be the anti-roll bar position. On the racing car, the anti-roll bars are very different to the road car. So we're used to seeing on the GT Porsches, on the road equivalent, a anti-roll bar with 3 holes in position settings, and the hole closest to the bar itself is full stiff, the hole furthest away is full soft. On the racing car, we have blade adjustable anti-roll bars. Now these are much more common in motorsport due to the range of adjustability they offer for the improvements in packaging as well. On a blade, we have 7 different notches of adjustment on the left and the right. That's 14 different positions that we can set this roll bar into, and that means that we can set the blade from either full soft, which is when it's completely flat to the ground like this, or in full stiff, which is when the blade is completely vertical to the ground like this. And that just literally changes how flexible that cantilever is in all of those varying positions. The closer to vertical we get, the more stiff that anti-roll bar becomes. This means that we can quickly and effectively tune the anti-roll bar setting in very nice incremental stages to fine-tune the balance of the oversteer and understeer of the chassis at the mid-corner section. So we're going to start here at the front axle. We're going to soften this roll bar down slightly, and we're going to use that as an adjustment point to go back on track, and we can make quick trackside adjustments should we need to fine-tune the balance any further. So the key way to tune understeer and oversteer at the apex is to use the anti-roll bar distribution. So this means that if we have understeer, then we can do 2 things. We can soften the front, or we can stiffen the rear. This is going to change the dynamics of the chassis to reduce the understeer. So stiffening the rear will technically increase the oversteer characteristics, but if we're not oversteering yet, we can afford to do that to take it away from the front to give grip back to the front. If we're on full soft at the front, that's something we'd look to do at the rear. However, if the front isn't on full soft, we'd look to soften the front axle a little bit further on the roll bar to get the grip into the car. Likewise, if we're oversteering, we can stiffen the front anti-roll bar, or we can soften the rear anti-roll bar. This is the same thing in reverse. It offers grip back to the rear tyres at the apex, giving that a little bit more movement in the chassis to help put the grip down and not shock the tyre at the apex. So the next stage in the setup process is going to be the ride heights and the rake angle. So this is the next step, because for every drop in the suspension, we're going to actually be affecting camber through camber gain. I'm also going to be affecting toe through bump steer as well, at the front and the rear. So that's why we do this now before we set our camber and toe settings. Otherwise, they'd be knocked out if we did the ride height afterwards. The rake angle is also a setting that's not only going to offer a mechanical difference to the chassis in terms of load distribution, so we're actually bringing the nose down to get more mass onto that front tyre into the corner to reduce that understeer a little bit on entry as well, but it also has an effect over the aerodynamics on the vehicle for the rear wing position and also the splitter and underfloor aero on this car. So with the data sheet that we have with this car, we're actually able to look at exact chassis height positions and rake angle data to see exactly how that affects this aero package to make it work more effectively out on circuit. And also, again, we can offset that against the drag graph, so we can choose how much drag we're willing to give away in return for that underfloor aero to be active at this rake angle. So it's a really neat way of activating not only mechanical grip in the chassis to help with turning response, but it also gives increased downforce, activating that underfloor more effectively. So what we're going to do to this car is, as it came in, we want to see a bit more rake angle in the chassis. That's going to help address the understeer that the customer was experiencing, but it's also going to activate even more aero for a negligible increase in drag on the graph as well. So we're in a window where we can actually get more aero gain through a small nose drop in response for a little increase in drag. So well worth the trade-off in terms of getting this around the track as fast as possible. So we're going to be lowering the nose further on this, like we often do on the Porsche chassis, to get it working to its most optimum. So with the ride heights and rake angle all set, we're now going to turn our attention to getting the most optimum camber settings on the chassis. However, one big factor in suspension setup is also driver confidence. So we've spoken with the customer and we know the optimum settings for the tyre and chassis package. However, with it being race day so soon, only on Sunday, with today being Thursday, We don't want to change the car so much that he is then sitting in a completely different car that is unfamiliar with the handling, so he won't drive as fast. Because if we remove the driver confidence by giving someone a completely different car so quickly, it's going to reduce their confidence in knowing the limits, and they're going to naturally drive that car slower. So a huge factor in driving quickly is in fact driver confidence, and it's really important to discuss with the customer to find out what their bias is, if they like it to be a bit more understeery on the limit or oversteery, and where their comfort level sits in terms of the chassis response to input. So with this car running slicks and much stiffer springs and a stiffer chassis, we can run a lot more camber than we otherwise would run on a road car with a grippy road legal tyre. This is because the increased force from the tyre and the chassis package means that we can carry a lot more lateral load through the corner, which means we're going to have a lot more G-force acting upon that chassis to really get up and use even more additional camber to get the full effects from the tyre package. So we're going to run a lot more camber. This chassis is actually adjustable up to 5 degrees on the front. You can get up to about 4 degrees on the back as well. We're not going to be going that high. We're going to be, high 3s, low 4s in the front and high 2s, low 3s on the rear for this sort of package. But we can get a lot more adjustment, so we can get as much potential out of these tyres as possible through the corners. The car comes fitted with the 3-way adjustable KW dampers, so we have the high-speed compression, low-speed compression and rebound all independently adjustable from one another. This means that we can fine-tune the low-speed compression and rebound to control how the car is behaving on corner entry, corner exit and under brakes and throttle, so we can control that behaviour. And it also means we can tune the high-speed compression to run things like curbs where it's fast impact, so we can bleed the curb off so we're not shocking the chassis, but then we can have a nice firm loading through the corner on the tyre using the low speed. So we're starting this car off in the lower end of the scales, which we can then at track fine tune based on the driver feedback and how the car is behaving, because the dampers are very easy to access. We can make very quick adjustments trackside. We've got the graphs to hand, so we can refer to those if needs be. We've got the driver feedback to work with as well, so we can fine tune towards the more aggressive end of the scale without going too far initially and having a more upsetting car. So the last step in the setup process is the toe. This is the first thing the driver feels, so it's the last thing that we set on the car. When we're setting up a race car, we do set this up differently than we would a road car. For example, on the front axle on this car, we're going to be towing out the front axle. This is going to improve turning response and get corner entry understeer removed from the chassis. And it'll make the car a lot quicker on corner entry. If this was being driven on the road though, that would have some negative aspects out on the road. In terms of cruising down the motorway, you want really high speed stability and you want the car to track in a nice straight line and want to stay in that straight line. That's where toe-in is very useful. If you toe in the front axle, you get a much more stable chassis at very high speed. So if you're going down the motorway at speed, it will want to track nice and true and straight, but it will have a slight resistance to wanting to change direction. This is good on the roads for just an added safety factor effectively, but on track, we want the car to be very responsive and we're focusing on maximizing lap time. This is why we tow out the front axle on this Porsche to get initial turning response, to get the chassis rotated as fast as possible. At the rear of the car, we're going to be towing in the axle. This would be the same as if it was on the road as well. We would tow in the rear for the road cars and for the race cars, and this is because of the rear engine position and rear wheel drive status of the vehicle. It's to give increased amounts of traction, and we're actually going to tow in the rear axle a little bit more than we would a road car on this because we're running even more aggressive camber settings. This means that in a straight line, we have a little bit less contact patch in terms of the tyre down to the ground for traction, so we can compensate for that with a little bit more toe in. This also means that through slow speed corners, where we're not quite loading all the tyre with a lot of G-force due to a lower speed, we can use that additional toe setting to give a little bit more traction from the rubber. So that means we have a faster car through the high speed corners using all the camber, and through the slow speed corners where we can't use all the camber, we're compensating with the toe setting to keep traction levels high at the rear. That's going to reduce the oversteer, and it's going to mean we have a much more stable chassis that we can lean on in various speeds of corner. So that's the GT2RS Clubsport all set up now, ready for the UAE Time Attack Series this coming Sunday. So we'll be at track with it to help fine tune and dial in the settings a little bit further on the day. But other than that, next steps for this car, heading straight to track, and let's try and get some trophies.